Hey y'all, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Dr. Sonia Daniels, and I love connecting people with information so that they can get unstuck. So, if this is your first time here, welcome. But if you are returning and you have watched previous conversations, welcome back. So, I don't think I've formally introduced myself, but I am the founder and lead consultant at SDC, short for S. Daniels Consulting, which is a 7.5-year-old leadership development consulting firm. In my work as a business owner and as a consultant, I've been super passionate about learning a lot, but then being able to translate that information to other people. So, what is so significant about today's conversation is that I am going to share with y'all what pivoting my business has been for me and what that experience has been like in real time. And I want to talk about the significance of being able to pivot and how to navigate change. So, of course, if you are here, it is because you are interested in learning more about how to master your own mindset. And so you are in the perfect place. So, as a mindset mastery content creator, a lot of the way I approach not only my work, but my business as a consultant is centered around making sure that I am prioritizing having a healthy mindset because I believe that is the foundation for success, growth, and ultimately happiness in how we live our lives. And so, today's conversation will be focused on what this pivot has been like for me, what has prompted or what had prompted the pivot, and what has my experience been like in navigating change. And so we'll jump right into it. So earlier this year, I decided to essentially shift the way that I have been functioning in my consulting business. The pivot was prompted by this nagging feeling that I had in my gut that would not go away. I have been having this nagging feeling for, I would probably say, since the end of last year up and through the new year. Finally, around like March, decided to take the leap and jump feet first into completely shifting the way I operate my business and what we provide to the people that we work with. So prior to the pivot, a lot of the work that we did was very much so generalist management consulting work where we focused on doing a lot of different types of projects for a lot of different types of clients in different industries. But after a while, the work started to feel very transactional. It felt as if I was getting contracts just to check off a box and just to say we made some money. Anyone who knows me really well knows that I am very purposeful and intentional about the way that I move through life. I'm very deliberate about how I show up in my life. And getting to the point where business felt very transactional was just very out of alignment with the way that I operate, but also the way that I want the business to operate. And it got to a point where this nagging feeling would not go away. So I decided to take a step back, reflect on it, do some introspection. I prayed on it, and I finally decided it was time to make the shift and pivot our business from generalist management consulting to niche down to focus on leadership development for high growth companies and growth oriented individuals. Now, the shift is important to me because I've always been a high achieving person. Even when I think back to being a child, I was always a child who was involved in a lot of different things. I was always on the principal's list or making honor rolls, straight A's, A's and B's. And so I've always been a high achieving person. And that has carried, of course, into my adulthood as well as the owner and founder of a consulting firm. If you are a high achieving person or at least a growth oriented person, there are benefits that come with that, but then there are also challenges a lot of times that come with that as well, of being a person who is just naturally good and gifted at a lot of different things. A lot of times what tends to happen is that we end up getting in our own way because we know what we're capable of. So sometimes it positions us to feel kind of lost in the sauce, or like lost in translation of what we need to do next. And so for me, when I started my career about 10 or 15 years ago in the nonprofit space, my first experience in my career, I would say like my first big girl job, I was positioned into a leadership position without necessarily having managed a team of people professionally. Now, granted, I was in clubs where I was the leader of a club, but leading people in a professional setting requires a healthy skill set to be able to not only manage myself, but also manage other people as well. That is why I'm super passionate about leadership development for growth oriented folks, because I recognize the benefits, but also the challenges that come with that. And so that is why I decided to shift into this new era of SDC. What was interesting is that around the time I decided to toy around with the idea of pivoting the business, there were a lot of, I would say, synchronicities, or just confirmations that I received throughout the process to help me understand that I was making the right decision. I specifically think back to a specific situation that happened one day. I had went to a coffee shop and I was waiting to meet with a client there. And so I sat down, got situated, and this older gentleman sat next to me. And it was a really interesting, it kind of threw me off just the way it happened. This older gentleman sat down, and so he spoke, and of course I'm in Louisiana. I don't know if I shared that, so we talk to anybody, like we talk to random strangers, so that part wasn't weird. And he asked me just what I was doing at the coffee shop, and I articulated that I was waiting to meet with a client. And he went into talking about just what he did for work. He asked me what type of client I was waiting for, or what type of work that I do. And I explained to him that I own a consulting firm. And he's like, "Oh, wow, how long have you been doing that?" I mentioned to him I had been doing business for about 7 years. He paused for a second and he said, "Oh, 7 years, the number of completion." And he continued to go on through conversation, but that had really stuck with me, especially if you are a person who has some type of spiritual relationship or you're religious. So in the spiritual world, seven, is the number of completion. And so when he said that, that was an indication to me that it was time to make that leap. What's been interesting about pivoting is that although I knew it was time to pivot, I was able to develop a strategy of what I wanted the pivot to look like. Navigating the pivot has been very interesting for me. And in some ways, it's been somewhat of a challenge in not necessarily knowing what this new idea or new vision or new purpose for the business is, or not what it is, but what it will look like. Essentially not having an idea of if it will be successful or not. And although that is essentially irrelevant to where things are right now, because I'm very clear and confident on this new vision and this new purpose for the business, as a human, when you're navigating change can be very scary. I tell people all the time, change is one of the most constant things that we will experience in our life. Change is something that happens every day, y'all, if not every hour on the hour. And so it's something that I implore people to get comfortable with, because change is something that will not go away. And what I always recommend folks do is learn how to get comfortable with change, because it's happening all the time for us. What I want to talk about today are some ways that we can master our mindset to build a foundation that allows us to comfortably manage change and navigate pivot, because it's something that we are required to do in every part of our life. That is what I want to talk about today with y'all, is how to navigate change, how to manage pivot, but about how to position yourself to make change as fruitful and the least amount of uncomfortability as possible. So let's jump right into it. Right. So first, let's talk about the power of change. Set the groundwork first because I like to give definitions to not make the assumption that everyone knows what I'm talking about. And I feel like it's really helpful for me to just articulate what it means to pivot, especially in the context of business, so that we can all start off on the same level of understanding for this conversation. So, pivot in a business context refers to a strategic shift in direction, often triggered by new information or market changes. When a company modifies its business models, its product offerings or services, companies may change their target market or their overall strategy to align with evolving customer needs or market demands. It is a way for businesses and companies to reevaluate and adjust their core strategy of their business to address the current landscape. When our current president was elected, because I have a background in public policy, I was aware, or at least I knew that there were going to be some major shifts that were going to happen. I did not anticipate the amount of shifts that happened so quickly, especially at the top of the year. As I mentioned, when I first started my business, a lot of the work that we were doing was generalist work. And our target market, our target audience was nonprofits. And so if you've been keeping up with the changes or the shifts that have been happening with the current administration, you'll know that the nonprofit sector was one of the first sectors to be targeted in terms of changes that the president wanted to make around funding and just really the structure of the nonprofit sector in general. And so it was a shock for sure. And now that we are in April, almost in May, I definitely can see the way that it's impacted not only my business in terms of how we've been working with our nonprofit clients, but also just other consulting friends and partners as well, who have also been impacted in terms of like their workload and their contracts because of the changes that are happening in our current economy. And although I kind of knew what could happen because of the decisions being made by the president, my pivot was not necessarily focused on that. My pivot was more so focused on, I just knew it was time for a change. I felt very much so out of alignment with, again, just the goal and the purpose of the business. But I am grateful I decided to pivot when I did, because I was able to essentially jump ahead of the major changes that were happening to some of the target clients or audiences that my business traditionally did business with in the first place. Now that I've shared that with y'all, I want to jump in to talk about some necessary skills that are extremely helpful for you as a leader or a business owner when we talk about navigating change and managing the concept of pivoting. So we're going to jump right into it with the first one, self-awareness. Self-awareness is the ability to understand your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors and how they affect others. Now, why is this important? Why does this matter? It matters because self-awareness allows you to assess how change is affecting you, whether emotionally or mentally, and it helps you catch those limiting beliefs or unproductive patterns, making it easier to shift towards positive action. I will say, when I decided to make the pivot in my business and start to get comfortable with change, there were some days where I was like, why did I make this decision? Why did I decide to pivot my business? Change is not always comfortable at all. And so there were days where my limiting beliefs were ahead of, I guess, the optimism or the ability to see opportunities in the change. And so we all have limiting beliefs, but the ability to prioritize self-awareness will allow you, which it did for me, to catch those limiting beliefs before they became, I guess, like my central thought process. The skills needed here are the ability to be able to reflect regularly on your emotions and your reactions. And it's also really helpful, and especially when we talk about wellness as a leader, the ability to be able to journal and also be able to meditate on how to gain clarity to not get stuck in the difficult parts of change. For me, as a founder of a business, as a leader of a business, I prioritize my wellness. I go on morning walks. I make sure I dedicate time to myself and space for myself to be able to prioritize the thoughts that I'm having and get clarity on just the way I'm feeling about a lot of things. And throughout the pivoting process, I would say it took me a good 3 weeks to regain my footing, because there were days, like I mentioned, I got lost in just the limiting beliefs or negative thoughts about why did I make the decision that I made. And I'm gonna be honest with y'all, it was just really uncomfortable. The change was just really uncomfortable because of the reality of, one, knowing I made a good decision, but not being able to see the next step or the light at the end of the tunnel. Because I'm a very self-aware person, I just allowed myself to take a step back and be like, you know what? I trust myself. I trust my creator, and I trust the vision that I was given about this pivot. And so because of that, it made the change process a whole lot easier to navigate. One of the second things I believe is really important when we talk about building a solid foundation to navigate change is having a growth mindset, which I am so big on making sure that I am always positioning myself to have a growth mindset, but also making sure I'm around people who have a growth mindset as well, so that I'm not being around people or in environments that are negative or that stop me from being able to see the possibility in things. A growth mindset is the belief that skills and abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. This mindset helps individuals view challenges as opportunities for growth rather than threats. Now, that is huge. A few months ago, I would probably say at the end of 2024, I did a podcast, which I'll share the link in the video description. And the podcast was around change. And so that conversation will also be relevant to this conversation as well. What I thought was interesting for that conversation is that the podcast host asked me a question about, how do I navigate change in a way that makes it as easy as possible when I don't know what comes next? What I mentioned in that conversation was that I am a person who sees opportunities and possibilities in every single thing. Anything that's presented to me, it's easy for me to see it as an opportunity or see the possibility in it. And that works really well as a consultant too, especially when folks are coming to me because they have some type of organizational challenge, or individuals come to me when they feel stuck in some area. I am always able to see the opportunity and possibility of what could be, even if there's a lack of clarity around what that thing might be. And so it's really helpful to have a growth mindset. And let me tell you why that matters. A growth mindset fosters resilience and flexibility, both of which are essential to adapting to new situations. It allows you to embrace learning, even when the process of change is uncomfortable or unfamiliar, which is something I've been saying a lot in this conversation. And the skill that is needed when we talk about growth mindset is the ability to embrace challenges and failures as learning opportunities. I am definitely a person, when I am in a challenging situation, or when I am in a situation and the results are not ideal to what I would like them to be, I always view that as, what can I learn from this experience? Whether it's something related to my business, which I've had a lot of challenges in business, but I always am able to reflect back on those and understand, what role did I play? How could I have changed the opportunity based on what I know after it has happened? And how do I prevent myself from being in that situation in the future? If it's something in my personal life, whether it is dating or relationship, family relationships, whatever the case is, and there's something that happens and is not ideal, I always take a step back and reflect on that to understand, Now that I know or have this information, if I am presented with this situation again in the future, how do I navigate that to not end up back in this situation? One thing about me, y'all, I rarely deal with the same situation twice because I tend to learn my lesson the first time. Now, sometimes I'm a little stubborn and I don't always take the time to reflect, but 9 times out of 10, I will reflect on the situation so that I don't put myself in that situation again. It's the ability to be able to continuously seek self-improvement and feedback, which are super important to me as I navigate life just in general. The third thing I want to mention to y'all when we talk about navigating change and the art of the pivot is emotional regulation. Now, if this is your first time being introduced to me and the content that I talk about, I would encourage you to go watch some of my other videos, and especially when I talk about mastering your emotions, because emotional regulation is the key to a really great life. I will stand on that hill. That is my soapbox. Emotional regulation is so necessary because as humans, we are all navigating really interesting things in life. Everybody comes from different households. We're all taught different things. We all experience life in different ways. And so emotional regulation is the key to be able to manage experiences, especially when emotions are elevated to the surface. Now, let's talk about what emotional regulation is. It is the ability to manage and respond to your emotional experiences in a healthy way. This includes staying calm, staying focused, balanced, even in stressful situations. And of course, as I mentioned, y'all, change can be really stressful. Emotional regulation matters because when change happens, you will experience emotions. And I'm going to tell y'all this, I experience fear, anxiety, and frustration. And those are very common things when we talk about change. And of course, as I mentioned, although this conversation is centered around change in a business context, again, change is constant in every one of our lives every day. Change can be moving from a new city, hell, moving into a new place, a new apartment, a new house, getting into a relationship, getting out of a relationship, having kids, losing a job, starting a new job, financial changes, really just the whole gamut of experiences. There's an element of change to it. Whether it's a good change or a bad change, it's still change regardless. And so it's important to be able to navigate and manage your own emotions, regulate your emotions, because it will help you stay clear-headed through each of these transitions that you go through. Some of the skills that are needed here when we talk about emotional regulation is practicing mindfulness or any breathing exercises to center yourself, especially in those moments when you find your emotions elevated. It's also helpful to be able to identify triggers, but also developing coping strategies as well, which I definitely recommend for y'all. For me, what that looks like sometimes is just being able to take a step back from whatever the situation is. I'm so grateful that in my business, I have prioritized freedom and autonomy, which I actually talked about in one of my other conversations about my motivations around business. The beauty of having freedom and autonomy in my life because of the way that I have built my business is that throughout this period of change over the last month or so, because I have a lot of flexibility on days where change felt very hard, I was able to just be like, you know what, I'm going to just log out the computer, take a step back, take a day off, and really just prioritize my own well-being so that I can be great for the business. That has been the beauty of the way that I have built this business, is that it allows me to just be a better and a healthier human as I navigate just all of the things that come with running a business. Adaptability is key when we talk about change. It's so important. And it is the ability to adjust your thoughts and behaviors and plans when circumstances change. And again, this happens all the time. It's about being able to be open to new ways of thinking and doing things. A part of adaptability is being open-minded. That's such a beautiful skill when I meet open-minded people because I'm a very open-minded person. I love taking in new information because it actually helps me challenge my own thought process and be able to increase or enhance or refine my own open-mindedness. I love when people present me with new information because it allows me to understand where I sit on the spectrum of my thought process about things. But then it also allows me to be open to the idea of things that I just didn't know about, or new concepts or new information. In some cases, even when new information is presented to me, even if I don't agree with that information, I'm willing to sit with it and understand what role it plays in my life and is it useful to me. I think adaptability and open mindedness is extremely important. It matters because change is something that requires you to quickly adjust to it. And so, if you are set in your ways or overly attached to this thing has to be a certain way, it is going to be super hard to accept new possibilities. Again, as I mentioned to y'all, I am very clear on what I want the new vision and new purpose of my business to look like. However, I don't necessarily know what the future, I don't know what the end of the year is going to look like. I don't know what the next 5 years is going to look like, but I'm open to the possibilities that come with pivoting and with change. What has also been super helpful to me when we talk about the concept of change management and pivoting is the idea of resilience, or the ability to be able to bounce back. Change brings on a lot when we talk about possible adversities, setbacks, failures, and the ability to continue forward with renewed energy. And so resilience is important because change can definitely feel like a roller coaster. As much as I like going to theme parks and ride roller coasters, the roller coaster that change brings is not always the funnest ride. I will tell y'all that. But it's important to be able to know how to get back up after you are being challenged with change. Resilient individuals maintain focus on a long-term vision rather than getting bogged down by short-term setbacks. Resilience is something that you definitely have to learn through time and with experiences. I am super grateful that I was raised by my mom, who taught me how to not let challenges and hard times keep me down. So that has been a great skill for me to be able to have as a foundation, but also to keep refining over time as I navigate life. Resilience is key for me. It's been helpful as a first generation business owner. It's been one of the main things that has helped me to get beyond 7 years in business, because if you're familiar, a lot of businesses don't make it past 1 year. And then beyond that, a lot of businesses close their doors at year 5. And so for me to be almost at year 8 in November, resilience plays a huge role in that, because there have been a lot of times in business where I was just unsure of what needed to happen next. There was a lot of times where I just didn't know the next step to take. I may not have had all the information I needed, all of the tools and skills that I needed, but resilience did an amazing job of keeping me on course to be able to bounce back every single time something has happened in my business that has not been the most ideal situation. If you are a person who is curious about where you stand when it comes to resilience, I want you to take a second to think about a hard situation that has happened in your life. And it can be anything, because hard is subjective based on the individual. Think about a hard situation that you have dealt with, and think about how you navigated the season or the period after that hard situation. What did that look like for you? And that will help you understand where you stand with resilience and if there's room for refinement or improvement in that space. One of the last things that I want to talk about when we talk about navigating change and talk about change management and pivoting is the ability to be decisive and take action. What it is the ability to be able to make decisions quickly and to take consistent action. This includes trusting yourself to make choices even in the face of uncertainty. I want to share with y'all how I've been doing a lot of self-work as a business owner and a business leader. Over the past year or so, I have done a lot of work around my own self-concept and how or who I understand myself to be, based on what I believe about myself to be true, my values, my morals, how I show up in the world, what do I want that to look like? When we talk about the ability to be able to make decisions, I had to grow into a space to be able to trust myself to make decisions. I tell people a lot of times, in a lot of cases, there's not necessarily a right or wrong, because again, that is based on what makes sense to the person making the decision. So I don't necessarily believe in the concept of making a right decision or a wrong decision. For me, I make decisions based on what makes sense to me in that moment, in relation to the information I have about whatever that thing is. In retrospect, sometimes once I make a decision, I may understand that, oh, I could have made a different decision, but I made the best decision at the time. And for me, that allows me to be able to trust myself in navigating how to make decisions. And so because I have built that level and element of trust within myself, I am able to make decisions very quickly. Again, as a business owner and business leader, there are times when I am required to make very quick decisions. I may have a client come to me with something and they are very unclear about what needs to happen next. I trust myself enough to make a quick decision on that because my clients trust me as the expert in these client engagements, in these relationships. I am grateful that I have taken time to understand myself and what makes sense to me so that I'm able to trust myself when it's time to navigate making decisions. In some cases, making the decisions are not always easy, but I choose to make the easiest decision in that situation. Being decisive and taking action is important because when you are pivoting or navigating change, indecision can definitely paralyze you. Having the confidence to make decisions, to take action, helps you move forward without getting stuck in analysis paralysis. Again, as a business leader, and when I say leader, you can be any type of leader. It might not necessarily be in the context of running a business or being a leader at an organization. You might be a coach of a sports team. You may be a leader of your child's PTA. You may be the head of some organization in your church, or maybe your Greek organization, your sorority or fraternity. You could be the person in your family who is the leader of the family, which is relatable to me. I tend to be the person in my family who plans gatherings, family reunions, just keep people together. That is the role I tend to play in my family. Regardless of what your leadership title is or what that role looks like, these skills are all super necessary to be able to navigate any changes that come up in those spaces. And so being able to trust yourself to make a decision, to not get stuck, is imperative to be a healthy leader. Now, what I want to encourage you on as we wrap up is that navigating change, especially in business, but just in general, can be a very daunting process. But developing these mindset mastery skills will set you up for success, whatever success looks like for you. It's not about avoiding discomfort, it's about learning to embrace and grow through it. If you can master your mindset during times of change, you would not only be able to weather the storm, but you'll be able to thrive in the process. I can assure you that because of this work that I continually do, when I talk about mindset mastery and just the way that I show up in life, but also in my business, it allows me to have a very fruitful life, a very happy life, a very joyous and warm life. At the end of the day, I am thriving because I consistently position myself to work on my mindset and just the way I show up in the world. So I hope that there was one thing that you were able to take away from this conversation today. Let me know what resonated with you in the comments, or let me know if there's one thing that caught your attention in this conversation that you plan to incorporate into your life. But I want to encourage you to keep doing the good work that you're doing and to keep showing up for yourself, because the fruits of your labor will be so amazing and you'll be able to prosper and be abundant. So that is all I have for y'all today. I hope that this was helpful for at least one person, and I look forward to our next conversation. I'm excited for you. I believe in you, and I hope you have an amazing day. Take care, y'all.